The late afternoon sun filtered into the kitchen, casting a warm, golden hue across the polished countertops where Michael sipped his coffee. It was an ordinary day, marked by quiet routines and predictable rhythms, until Samantha's best friend Melissa arrived with her signature energy and a bottle of red wine. Melissa had always been the life of the party, a relentless storyteller, her laughter infectious, but today her visit felt different. "So," Melissa said, swirling her glass, "last Friday was a wild night." She let out a laugh that seemed to fill the room. Michael's brow furrowed as he glanced up from his tablet. "Wild night?" he asked casually, his curiosity piqued. Melissa waved her hand dismissively, her cheeks slightly flushed. "Oh, just one of Samantha's adventures. You know how she is. Out with Chris and the gang." "Chris?" Michael's voice was steady, though a cold tension tightened in his chest. Melissa hesitated, realizing her slip. Yeah, just some new guy from work. You probably don't know him," she added quickly, but her attempt at nonchalance was clumsy. Michael leaned back in his chair, the silence between them stretching uncomfortably. "I don't think Samantha mentioned him," he said, his tone light but his gaze sharp. "Ali," Melissa laughed nervously, taking a large sip of wine. "Oh, I'm sure it's nothing. You know how she loves making new friends." "Eric." Michael nodded, his face betraying none of the questions now swirling in his mind. He watched as Melissa continued to talk, her voice becoming a dull hum against the rising buzz of suspicion in his head. When Samantha returned home that evening, her laughter filled the house as she set down her bags and kissed Michael on the cheek. He smiled in return, though his mind lingered on Melissa's words. "Who's Chris?" he asked as casually as he could manage. Samantha froze for the briefest of moments, her expression unreadable. "Oh, just a colleague," she said smoothly, brushing past him. "Why?" "No reason," Michael replied, his voice calm. But in that moment, he knew he would find the truth. Michael lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling as Samantha slept soundly beside him. Her even breathing filled the room, but his thoughts raced. Melissa's slip-up replayed in his mind, her nervous laugh echoing louder with every passing second. A name like Chris didn't come up in their everyday conversations, and Samantha's brief hesitation had been like a neon sign pointing to something she wasn't saying. He slipped quietly from bed and padded down the hallway to his study. Once the door was closed, he sat at his desk and opened his laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating his face. He started with her social media accounts, photos, tagged posts, comments. Samantha was careful, her posts curated to perfection, but Michael noticed a change. Her photos with him had grown less frequent over the past year, replaced by solo shots or pictures with friends. He clicked through a series of photos from a recent work outing. There was nothing incriminating, just a group of colleagues at a rooftop bar, but in the background of one photo, he noticed Samantha's smile, one he hadn't seen in years. She wasn't looking at the camera, she was looking at someone off frame. Michael leaned forward, scrutinizing the image. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Over the next few days, Michael became a detective in his own home, careful not to raise Samantha's suspicions. He checked her phone when she left it unattended, scrolling through messages and call logs. There was no Chris in her contacts, but a string of unsaved numbers caught his eye. One in particular had a recurring pattern: texts sent late at night, replies during odd hours. Soon, he jotted the number down and turned to an old friend, Mark, who worked in cybersecurity. "Just a favor," Michael said when he called, masking his unease with a laugh. Mark didn't ask questions, but he promised to help. Meanwhile, Michael observed Samantha with new eyes. The late nights she attributed to extra work, the quick glances at her phone followed by a guilty smile, each moment fed his growing doubts. One evening, while she was in the shower, he opened her laptop. It was locked, but her password was easy to guess, the name of their dog and her favorite year. He found nothing unusual in her email, but her calendar told a different story. Meetings that stretched late into the night were labeled with vague titles like team brainstorm, or client strategy. Cross-referencing these with her text to the unsaved number only deepened the mystery. Mark called the next day. "The number you gave me belongs to a guy named Chris Jordan, lives downtown. Want me to dig deeper?" Michael hesitated, a knot forming in his stomach. "No, I'll handle it from here." That evening, when Samantha breezed through the door with her usual cheerful energy, Michael couldn't help but study her every move. For the first time in their marriage, she felt like a stranger. Michael stood in the kitchen the next evening, his hands gripping the edge of the counter as he steadied himself. The proof sat in his pocket. A report from Mark detailing Chris Jordan's background, including his connection to Samantha's workplace. It was undeniable now. The texts, the calendar entries, the late nights. It all led back to Chris. Sometime when Samantha walked in, humming a tune and dropping her bag onto the couch, Michael turned to face her. "We need to talk," he said, his voice calm but firm. She froze, her hand halfway to the coat rack. "What's wrong?" she asked, her smile faltering. Michael gestured toward the dining table where he had laid out a small folder. Samantha hesitated before walking over, her movement stiff, her smile gone. "Sit," he said. She obeyed, her eyes flicking nervously to the folder. Michael took a deep breath, his voice even as he began. "I've been noticing things, Samantha. Late nights at work, unexplained absences, and then Melissa mentioned someone, Chris." He paused, watching her reaction. Her face was a mask of composure, but her hands clenched the edge of the chair. "You're being paranoid," she said with a forced laugh, but her voice wavered. Michael didn't respond immediately. Instead, he opened the folder and slid a sheet of paper toward her. "This is the phone number you've been texting. It belongs to Chris Jordan. Your colleague, right?" Samantha's face paled. She opened her mouth to speak, but Michael held up a hand. "Don't. Just listen." He leaned forward, his tone sharp. "I've been watching, Samantha. You think I wouldn't notice? The lies, the late-night texts, the meetings that don't add up? You've been careful, but not careful enough." Samantha sat frozen, her lips trembling. Finally she spoke, her voice small. "It's not what you think." Michael's laugh was bitter. "Oh, really? Then what is it? Tell me, Samantha. Make me believe you." She hesitated, then said, "We're just friends. We've been working closely, and maybe it looks bad, but—" Michael cut her off, his voice rising. "Don't insult me. I have the texts, the dinner receipts, even your calendar. You've been seeing him behind my back." Tears welled in Samantha's eyes, and she shook her head. "Michael, please. I didn't mean for this to happen. It was just, I felt so lost. And Chris, he made me feel alive." Michael's jaw tightened. "So that justifies lying to me, betraying me?" Samantha's tears spilled over as she reached for his hand. "I still love you, Michael. This was a mistake. I was confused." Michael pulled his hand away, his voice colder than she'd ever heard it. "You don't get to rewrite this as confusion. You made a choice, Samantha. Now, I'm making one." He stood, his heart pounding as he walked to the door. "I'm filing for divorce. We're done." Samantha's sobs filled the room as Michael left, the weight of betrayal replaced by the clarity of action. The days after the confrontation were a blur of muted emotions and quiet rage for Michael. He hadn't returned home that night, instead driving aimlessly through the city, the neon signs of late-night diners and bars reflecting on his windshield. When he finally pulled into a motel parking lot, he didn't sleep. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the patterns on the wallpaper, wondering how his life had unraveled so quickly. By the next morning, Michael's resolve had hardened. He called a lawyer, a friend from college who specialized in family law, and explained the situation. "I have evidence," he said firmly. "Text messages, financial records, everything." His lawyer, David, was professional but empathetic. "Michael, I'll handle the paperwork, but this isn't just about legalities. You need to prepare yourself. Divorces involving infidelity are messy, especially when emotions run high. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Michael wasn't sure if he was, but he nodded anyway. Back at the house, Samantha was frantic. She had tried calling him a dozen times, leaving voicemails that swung between desperate apologies and angry accusations. Michael listened to none of them. Instead, he texted her one line, "We'll talk through the lawyers." Word spread quickly among their friends and family. Melissa, guilt-ridden from her unintentional reveal, reached out. "Michael, I had no idea. If I had known..." "You didn't betray me, Melissa." "She did," Michael replied curtly, his patience thin. Samantha's best friend became an unlikely ally. She began to distance herself from Samantha, quietly offering Michael information about Samantha's actions. "She's been trying to spin the narrative," Melissa admitted one afternoon over coffee. "She's telling people you've been distant, obsessed with work, and that the affair was just a cry for help." Michael clenched his jaw. Of course, she's painting herself as the victim. The fallout extended to Samantha's workplace. Michael wasn't the vindictive type, but Chris's smug indifference gnawed at him. Using the evidence he had gathered, he anonymously sent a detailed account of the affair to their company's HR department. It didn't take long for whispers to circulate, for Chris to face scrutiny from his superiors. Samantha wasn't immune either. Her colleagues treated her differently, polite but distant, their conversations ending abruptly when she entered the room. The secrecy that had once emboldened her now became her undoing. At home, Michael methodically boxed up Samantha's belongings. Every photograph, every memento of their life together went into storage. He kept only what was his, what held no connection to the betrayal. The house, once warm and full of shared memories, now felt sterile and cold. In a final blow to Samantha's carefully constructed narrative, Michael hosted a quiet dinner with close friends and family. Without bitterness, but with unwavering honesty, he shared his side of the story. By the end of the evening, there was no doubt about where the fault lay. As the fallout continued, Michael felt a quiet strength returning. His life wasn't whole, but it was his again. The divorce proceedings moved swiftly. Michael, with his calm demeanor and meticulously documented evidence, had the upper hand. His lawyer ensured that everything went as smoothly as possible, minimizing the dramas Samantha had hoped to incite. Each court session felt like another chapter closing, not just on their marriage, but on the years of trust that had been shattered. Samantha's attempts to spin the narrative faltered under the weight of undeniable proof. She had once been skilled at charming her way out of difficult situations, but this time her usual strategies failed. The text logs, financial records, and testimony from mutual acquaintances left no room for manipulation. Even her closest allies began to see her in a different light. The names and testimonies had interacted with had led to their release on the night watch. Michael returned to the home they had shared one final time to collect the last of his belongings. The house felt foreign now, an empty shell stripped of meaning. He paused in the living room, looking at the spot where they had celebrated holidays, exchanged gifts, and laughed about trivial things. It wasn't sadness he felt, but a sense of finality. He was ready to move on. In the weeks that followed, Michael started building a life that was entirely his own. He moved into a modest but comfortable apartment, decorated sparsely with items he had chosen for himself. There were no reminders of the life he'd left behind. His mornings became quieter, his evenings more reflective. He read books he had always meant to read, picked up jogging again, and rediscovered the joy of simple, solitary moments. Work, too, became a refuge. The distraction of his projects and the camaraderie of his colleagues helped him stay grounded. People at the office noticed the change in him, an air of determination, of someone who had been through the fire and emerged stronger. They didn't pry, they simply supported him, offering kindness and understanding in their own quiet ways. As for Samantha, the fallout of her actions reverberated through her life. Her reputation at work was in tatters. Though the company didn't fire her outright, the atmosphere became icy. Chris, her lover, was less fortunate. The HR investigation revealed breaches of workplace ethics, and he was let go. Samantha quickly found herself isolated. Her once bustling social circle now reduced to a handful of acquaintances, too polite or too curious to cut ties entirely. One day, Melissa reached out again. "I ran into Samantha," she said hesitantly. "She's not doing well, Michael. She said she misses you." Michael's response was measured but firm. "Melissa, I appreciate you telling me, but I've moved on. She made her choices. Now I'm making mine." It wasn't anger that fueled his decision to cut ties completely. It was clarity. For the first time in years, he saw things as they truly were, unclouded by emotion or denial. Months later, Michael stood on the porch of his new home, a small but charming townhouse on the outskirts of the city. He watched the sunset, its golden hues painting the sky, and felt a profound sense of peace. The betrayal that had once consumed him no longer defined him. It was simply a part of his story, a chapter that had shaped him but didn't control him. One evening, he attended a community event at a local art gallery. He struck up a conversation with a woman named Laura, a schoolteacher with a warm smile and a quick wit. They talked for hours about books, travel, and life's unexpected twists. It wasn't love at first sight, but it was genuine. For the first time, Michael felt the stirrings of something new, a quiet hope for what could be. Samantha, meanwhile, faced a different path. Her attempts to rebuild her life were halting and fraught with challenges. The ease with which she had once navigated social and professional circles was gone. Every interaction seemed tinged with an awareness of her past, a shadow she couldn't quite escape. In the end, Michael found himself grateful, not for the pain, but for the lessons it taught him. He learned the strength of his own resilience, the importance of boundaries, and the value of self-respect. Life moved on, as it always does, and with each passing day, Michael became more certain that the end of his marriage was not the end of his story, but the beginning of a better one.